Hello everybody! Welcome to Hancock Park's virtual experiences. I am here to teach you about salamanders today. So I'm going to read us a book called A Salamander's Life. In spring, a salamander lays her eggs in a pond. A red-spotted newt watches the first larva break free. The salamander larva catches and eats a copeopod. A giant water bug would like to eat the salamander larva, but misses. Soon the salamander grows hind legs. The salamander must swim to the surface for air. At the end of summer, the young salamander leaves her pond. She hunts for insects at the edge of the pond. As the salamander grows, she moves farther into the woods. A milk snake grabs the salamander, but then lets go. Salamanders have a bad tasting skin. The salamander catches an earwig under the leaves. As it grows cold, the salamander looks for a burrow. A deer mouse watches. The salamander sleeps through the cold winter. A rainy spring evening wakes the salamander. It wakes thousands of salamanders. It wakes frogs too. A bright light falls on the salamander. Gentle, curious hands lift her. Then they put her back down. The frogs and the salamanders return to the pond. The salamanders swim through the water looking for a mate. At last, she finds a mate. Now the salamander lays eggs of her own, and she begins the journey back to the woods. Summer night after summer night, the salamander hunts. Winter cold after winter cold, the salamander sleeps. Hey, so I hope you enjoyed our story today. Now, that just gave us kind of a little bit of an introduction into salamanders. So let's learn a little bit about salamanders, okay? Salamanders are amphibians. So this little salamander is called a redback salamander. Let me take a look there. It is actually one of the only true salamanders. There's actually 5 different families of salamanders. Now these little redback salamanders live here in Hancock County, and you can find them in moist areas. So like underneath a log or underneath leaves is where they like to be. Now they grow to be about 2 to 5 inches long, and they're found through most of Ohio. Now the neat thing about this little salamander is it lays eggs, but it lays its eggs in moist soil. It doesn't have to have water in order to lay its eggs, because the larva stage of the salamander actually grows inside the egg. So when it hatches out of the egg, it's all ready to breathe air. But not all salamanders are like the redback salamander. Now this little salamander is another one that we can find here in Hancock County. This is called a smallmouth salamander. Now this little smallmouth salamander, you might notice its head looks a little bit different. Kind of looks like the shape of a frog, okay? It's a type of little mole salamander, okay? This little smallmouth is a type of mole salamander, so a little bit different than the true salamanders. Now, with our salamander here, it can be between 4.5 to 7 inches long. Ready? It lays eggs in vernal pools. Now, in Litzenberg, there we often find vernal pools. A vernal pool is when it rains in the spring and it forms like a little lake, and that lake stays as long as we're in that rainy season, and then in the summer it dries up. Well, our little mole salamander, this little smallmouth salamander, needs the vernal pool because it lays its eggs in the water. And when those eggs hatch, it hatches into little larvae. And those larvae are aquatic. They have gills that they use to breathe in the water. And then they use metamorphosis to change into the adult version. Now, these little salamanders are a little bit more aquatic, so when that water dries up, they will actually dig down into the mud and stay hidden until they get the rain again and come back out. Now, another salamander that we have here in Ohio is this one here. Right? It's called a mud puppy. You may have seen these before. These are much bigger. I bet you didn't even know that they were salamanders. They are a type of salamander. They're not the true salamander. They're not a mole salamander. They're actually their own family. We call them, of course, mud puppies. Sometimes people call them water dogs. Now, the big part of these salamanders, of course, is that you notice you can see the frill. You can see their external gills in there. So they are aquatic. They live in water. They like streams and ponds. Now, they are larger salamanders. They can actually grow to be about 11 to 16 inches long. Now, the neat thing about these little salamanders, they're a lot of fun, is that since they have these external gills, they're fun to watch. Now, if you ever find one in the water, they're neat to see, but whenever you touch a salamander, you always want to make sure that you have wet hands. Okay? Now, the reason that you want to make sure that they have wet hands is that salamanders are amphibians, and they can actually breathe out of their skin. Now, in order to breathe from their skin, so they have lungs they can breathe, but in order to breathe from the skin, they have to keep their skin moist. If you touch a salamander with dry hands, you can actually injure the salamander. Now, salamanders, as I said, are amphibians, so they lay eggs, and we'll take a look here. We saw in the book that they lay eggs, and when those eggs hatch, they hatch into little larvae. Okay? Those little larvae have those external gills, and then some of those salamanders lose those external gills so that they can leave the water. So some salamanders can actually be a little bit more terrestrial. They still need where it's moist, so you'll find them under logs. Some salamanders, like the mud puppies, stay in the water the whole time. But they're not the only amphibians that are out there. Other animals that are amphibians are things like frogs, okay, and toads, and something called a newt. Now, salamanders and newts are often mistaken for each other. They look very similar. But the thing is with newts, remember I said the salamander has real moist skin? Our newt actually, believe it or not, has a little drier skin, which is interesting because newts spend most of their time in the water, and we said that salamanders can spend time out of the water. So even though they live in the water, their skin is actually a little bit drier. So they don't have that mucus that keeps their skin moist. And they don't need that as much because since they're in the water, they already have the water so that they can breathe through the skin. Salamanders have to keep their moist skin because in order to breathe air through their skin, they have to have moist skin. And since they're out of the water, they have to be able to do that. Now, the interesting thing also with our amphibians, so our frogs, our toads, right? This is an eastern chorus frog. This one here is our American toad, and then our newt. The interesting thing is with them is that they are all vertebrates. So a vertebrate means that they have bones in their body. Other vertebrates are mammals, birds, reptiles, and fish, and then of course our amphibians. So they do metamorphosis. So that means they change. They have gills when they are young, and then they change to lungs when they are older. And just like fish and reptiles, they are ectothermic. That means that they are cold-blooded. So they change to the body temperature, okay, that they have outside. Mammals and birds are warm-blooded, but amphibians, reptiles, and fish are all cold-blooded. Okay? Now, Also, let's talk a little bit about these newts. So we said that one of the differences is that the newts have the drier skin and the salamanders have the moist skin. Now the other thing is, since newts spend most of their time in the water, they have webbed feet. Now the neat thing about newts though, one of the main things is newts can actually regenerate body parts. Now, salamanders can too. That means if they lose a tail or if they lose an arm or a leg, they can oftentimes grow that. But newts take it to the extreme, because if they lose a body part, they can regrow that, but they can also regrow internal organs. Amazing. So if they lose or have damage some of their insides, they can actually regrow those. And in fact, some newts can actually regrow body parts as much as 18 times. So they are pretty amazing animals. So amphibians are amazing, and salamanders are amazing, and newts are amazing. So I hope that you had a good time learning a little bit about salamanders today. We read our book here today, Salamander's Life, to learn a little bit. We've learned a little bit about some of the other amphibians out there. And then I hope that on Wednesday you join us again for Way Back Wednesdays, where we're going to join us at the McKinnis House to learn about pioneer times. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Bye.